The microphone screeched with feedback. At exactly 2:34 p.m. on November 8, 1972, inside the press room of the Mandarin Hotel in Hong Kong, something happened that would never be officially reported. Bruce Lee, the most disciplined man in entertainment, the master of emotional control, the embodiment of calm under pressure, stood up from his chair so fast that it crashed backward onto the floor. His eyes locked onto a journalist in the third row, and for 11 seconds, the room forgot how to breathe. This is the story of the press conference that almost ended in disaster. The comment that crossed a line no one knew existed. And the moment when Bruce Lee showed the world what happens when you touch something he truly cares about. This is not the Bruce Lee the cameras wanted you to see. This is the Bruce Lee who almost lost control. Hong Kong, November 1972. The press conference was supposed to be routine. Way of the Dragon had just broken box office records. Enter the Dragon was in post-production. Bruce Lee was at the peak of his fame, giving interviews almost daily, promoting films, discussing future projects. The Mandarin Hotel press room held perhaps 40 journalists, local Hong Kong press, a few international correspondents, entertainment reporters, sports writers who covered martial arts, a handful of photographers. Bruce arrived at 2:15 p.m. with Raymond Chow, his producer. He wore a simple dark blue shirt, no jacket, no tie. Casual, confident, ready for the usual questions. The first 20 minutes proceeded normally. Questions about Way of the Dragon's success. Questions about working with Chuck Norris. Questions about the Coliseum fight sequence and how it was filmed. Bruce answered with his characteristic blend of charm and precision. He demonstrated a technique when asked. He laughed at a joke about his appetite. He was performing the role of Bruce Lee, movie star, exactly as expected. Then a hand rose in the third row. The journalist was European. British accent. Perhaps 40 years old. He worked for an entertainment magazine based in London, covering Asian cinema for Western audiences. Mr. Lee, he said, I have a question about your creative process. Bruce nodded. Of course. I've been researching your background for a feature piece. I discovered something interesting. You compose music. You've written scores for some of your films. You consider yourself a musician as well as a martial artist. Bruce's expression shifted slightly. A flicker of something. Caution, perhaps. I enjoy music, yes. I've composed some pieces for my films. It's a creative outlet. The journalist continued. I've listened to some of your compositions. They're quite different from what I expected. Very emotional. Very personal. Almost vulnerable, one might say. Bruce waited. The room sensed something developing. My question is this. The journalist leaned forward slightly. Given that your music is so amateur, so clearly the work of a hobbyist without formal training, why do you insist on including it in professional film productions? Wouldn't it be more appropriate to hire actual composers? People with real musical education? The room went still. The question hung in the air, its condescension dripping like acid. Bruce Lee didn't move. For perhaps 3 seconds, he sat perfectly still. His face showed nothing. Then he stood up. The chair behind him crashed backward onto the floor. The sound was sharp, violent, unexpected. He didn't walk toward the journalist. He just stood there, behind the table, his hands flat on the surface, his body coiled with sudden tension. Repeat that. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. The journalist in the front row leaned back instinctively. The British journalist seemed to realize he had miscalculated. His confidence wavered. I simply meant that perhaps professional musicians would be more suitable for. I heard what you said. Bruce's voice cut through the excuse. I want you to repeat it. The word you used. Amateur. The room was frozen. Raymond Chow touched Bruce's arm. A calming gesture. Bruce, perhaps we should. Bruce didn't acknowledge him. His eyes never left the journalist. You come into my country. You sit in my press conference. And you call my work amateur. I didn't mean to. You meant exactly what you said. Bruce's voice rose slightly. Not shouting. Something worse than shouting. A cold, controlled fury that filled every corner of the room. You came here with that question prepared. You researched my background, found something personal, and decided to use it to make yourself feel superior. The journalist's face had gone pale. Mr. Lee, I apologize if. I don't want your apology. Bruce came around the table. Not rushing. Not aggressive. Just moving with that fluid, predatory grace that suddenly reminded everyone in the room exactly who they were dealing with. He stopped 3 feet from the journalist's chair. Do you play an instrument? The journalist swallowed. No. I don't. Do you compose music? No. Do you create anything? Films? Art? Writing? Anything at all? I'm a journalist. I write articles. Bruce nodded slowly. You write articles? About other people's work. About other people's creations. About things you have never tried to do yourself. He leaned closer. Not threatening. Worse than threatening. Teaching. Let me explain something to you. Something you clearly don't understand. Subscribe and leave a comment. Because what Bruce Lee said next would be remembered by everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. Music, Bruce said, is not about training. It's not about technique. It's not about how many years you studied or which conservatory gave you a certificate. He stepped back slightly, giving himself room to move, to gesture, to express. Music is about truth. It's about taking something that exists inside you, something that has no words, no form, no language, and giving it shape, giving it sound, letting it exist outside your own mind so that others can feel it too. His voice was still intense, but the raw anger was transforming into something else. Passion, conviction. You call my music amateur because I didn't study at Juilliard, because I can't read sheet music fluently, because I learned by listening, by feeling, by experimenting rather than by sitting in a classroom. He looked around the room at the other journalists. Do you know what amateur means? The word comes from Latin. Amare, to love. An amateur is someone who does something for love, not for money, not for recognition, not for professional advancement. For love. He turned back to the British journalist. Yes, I am an amateur musician. I compose because I love it. Because it moves something in me that martial arts alone cannot reach. Because when I sit at a piano or pick up a guitar, I access a part of myself that exists nowhere else. His voice softened slightly. Still intense. Still commanding. But less angry now. And you sit there, in your press suit, with your prepared questions designed to make me look foolish, and you think you're exposing something. You think you're revealing a weakness. He shook his head. You're revealing your own emptiness. Your own fear of creating. Your own safe position on the sidelines, judging those who actually risk something by putting their souls into their work. The journalist looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Bruce continued. Every song I have written came from something real. The loss of my father. The birth of my children. The struggle to find my place in a world that told me I didn't belong. The joy of movement, of expression, of being alive in a body that can do extraordinary things. He placed his hand on his chest. This is where music comes from. Not from conservatories. Not from degrees. Not from technical perfection. From here. From truth. From the courage to express what you feel even when people like you are waiting to mock it. The room was absolutely silent. Bruce looked at the journalist for a long moment. I will not apologize for my music. I will not apologize for composing without formal training. I will not apologize for being an amateur in the truest sense of that word. He turned and walked back toward his seat. But you, he said over his shoulder, should apologize. Not to me. To yourself. For choosing a life where you only observe, only criticize, only tear down, while the rest of us are busy creating. He righted his fallen chair and sat down. The silence continued for nearly 10 seconds. No one moved. No one spoke. The journalists seemed afraid to break whatever spell had fallen over the room. Finally, Raymond Chow leaned toward his microphone. Perhaps we should take a short break. No, Bruce said. His voice was calm now. Controlled. The storm had passed. Continue. I'm sure there are more questions. The British journalist quietly gathered his things and left the room. He never published the feature piece he had been researching. He never wrote about Bruce Lee again. The remaining journalists asked softer questions. Respectful questions. They had witnessed something they hadn't expected, and it had changed the energy of the entire event. At 3:45 p.m., the press conference concluded. As journalists filed out, several approached Bruce privately. They thanked him. Not for the interview. For the lesson. One local Hong Kong reporter, an older man who had covered entertainment for 30 years, shook Bruce's hand. I've watched 1,000 press conferences, he said. I've never seen anyone defend their art like that. Most people would have laughed it off. Made a self-deprecating joke. Let it go. Bruce looked at him steadily. Some things are worth defending. The reporter nodded. He understood. That evening, Bruce returned home to his apartment in Kowloon Tong. Linda noticed something different about him. A tension that hadn't been there when he left. What happened? Bruce was quiet for a moment. Someone tried to diminish something I care about. Linda waited. My music. Bruce sat down heavily on the couch. A journalist called it amateur. Said I should hire real composers. Said it was embarrassing to include hobbyist work in professional films. Linda sat beside him. And what did you do? Bruce almost smiled. I may have given a lecture on the nature of creativity and the courage required to express oneself. Linda laughed softly. The journalist survived. Physically, yes. Professionally, I'm not sure. They sat in comfortable silence. Then Bruce spoke again. It bothered me more than it should have. His words had given him time to reflect. The fighting, the martial arts, I expect criticism there. I've dealt with challengers my whole life. I know how to handle people who doubt my physical abilities. He paused. But the music, that's different. That's not about skill or power or proving anything to anyone. That's just me. The part of me that exists when no one is watching. The part that has nothing to prove. He looked at Linda. When he attacked that, it felt like he was attacking something I don't know how to defend. Something too personal. Too vulnerable. Linda took his hand. That's exactly why you defended it so fiercely. The things we protect most strongly are the things that matter most deeply. Bruce nodded slowly. I've spent my whole life building armor. Training my body. Developing my mind. Creating an image that can withstand any attack. His voice dropped. But some things should exist outside the armor. Some things should remain soft. Vulnerable. Human. If I armored everything, if I protected every part of myself, I would become untouchable. And being untouchable means being unreachable. He gestured vaguely. The music is how I stay reachable. How I stay connected to the parts of myself that have nothing to do with fighting or fame. The parts that just want to create something beautiful. Linda leaned against him. Then keep creating. Don't let one ignorant journalist change that. Bruce was silent for a moment. He didn't change it, he said finally. But he reminded me why it matters. Why I can't let anyone diminish it. Even accidentally. Even with a single careless question. Share and subscribe. Because the story of that night continues. The next morning, Bruce went to his private studio. It was a small room in their apartment that he had converted into a creative space. A piano. Several guitars. Recording equipment. Notebooks filled with musical notations that mixed standard Western notation with his own invented symbols. He sat at the piano and began to play. The piece he worked on that morning would eventually appear in Enter the Dragon. A quiet, contemplative melody that plays during one of the film's rare peaceful moments. No one who heard it would know its origin. No one would know that it emerged from the anger and reflection that followed a journalist's careless insult. Bruce worked on the piece for 3 hours. Adjusting notes, changing rhythms, searching for something he could feel but couldn't quite capture. At noon, he stopped. Not because the piece was finished, because he had found what he was looking for. He called Linda into the studio. Listen to this. He played the melody from the beginning. Simple, searching, a question more than an answer. When he finished, Linda was quiet. It's beautiful, she said. But it sounds sad. Bruce nodded. It is sad, but not the kind of sad that gives up. The kind of sad that keeps going anyway. The kind that knows something is broken, but chooses to create beauty from the broken pieces. He closed the piano. That journalist thought he was attacking a weakness. He thought my music was something to be embarrassed about. Something to hide. He stood up. He was right that it's amateur. Right that it's not technically perfect. Right that trained composers could do it better by professional standards. He turned to face Linda. But he was wrong about what that means. Amateur doesn't mean inferior. It means personal. It means honest. It means doing something because you love it, not because you're the best at it. He walked to the window. I will never be the best musician. I will never compose symphonies that trained orchestras perform. I will never have the technical mastery of people who have spent their entire lives studying music. He turned back. But I will always have something they might not. The willingness to be imperfect. The courage to create without credentials. The freedom that comes from having nothing to prove. He smiled slightly. That journalist taught me something yesterday. He reminded me why I create music in the first place. Not for critics. Not for approval. Not to prove I can compete with conservatory graduates. His voice strengthened. For myself. For the expression. For the truth that lives in the notes even when the notes are imperfect. For the amateur in me who still loves creating, who still risks vulnerability, who still believes that honest imperfection is worth more than calculated perfection. Bruce Lee composed music throughout the remaining months of his life. Some pieces appeared in his films. Others remained private, shared only with family and close friends. Most were never recorded professionally, existing only as memories and rough recordings that have never been released. Those who heard his music described it as unexpected, different from what they imagined Bruce Lee would create. Gentle where they expected power, vulnerable where they expected confidence, personal where they expected performance. That was the point. The music was the part of Bruce Lee that existed outside his public image. The part that needed no armor. The part that remained soft in a life that demanded constant hardness. The journalist who asked that question never knew what he had touched. Never understood why Bruce Lee's response was so intense. Never realized that he had stumbled into something sacred, something protected, something that mattered more than fame or fighting or films. He had touched the amateur. And the amateur was the truest part of Bruce Lee there was. November 8, 1972. Mandarin Hotel, Hong Kong. 40 journalists. One question. 11 seconds of frozen silence. And a man who showed the world that the things we defend most fiercely are the things we love most deeply. The music plays on. Even now. Somewhere in those imperfect notes, in those amateur compositions, in those melodies created for love rather than acclaim. Bruce Lee is still expressing what words could never capture. Still creating. Still amateur. Still free.